Let's bring in our think tank, see what they have to say about this. Joining us from South Orange, New Jersey, media law professor and legal journalist Candace Kelly is with us. From San Diego, California, via Staten Island, New York, criminal defense attorney David Shapiro. And also joining us in San Diego, California tonight, criminal defense attorney Vic Bajaj. Great to have everyone with us. Ladies first, of course. Candace, what's your reaction to the fact that the Attorney General's office of Minnesota is bringing in two private attorneys to help prosecute this case? And they've got prominent positions. I mean, two of the three people who will be presenting this case are from outside the AG's office.
Vinny, I think it all boils down to the fact that these must be great storytellers, because this is what we're talking about. We need a narrative. We need a story. And if they are great storytellers, persuasive enough in order to persuade the jury to be on their side, then I think that's what's going on here. And certainly there's enough work to go around. I mean, certainly we have what's going to be coming up in the summer, as well as possibly this third-degree manslaughter that might be added in terms of a charge. But it reminds me of what the city of Minneapolis did recently, which they got rid of this whole idea that they were going to hire these social influencers for $2,000 during the trial in order to influence and create a narrative. A lot of people didn't like that, and that idea was squashed because that is what it boils down to. What's the narrative? These trial attorneys are at the top of their game and doing what they do well, and that is creating a narrative that the jury can hang their hat on.
David Shapiro, is this a little unusual for the Attorney General's office or any prosecutor's office? And this is not a small office. This is the AG's office for the state of Minnesota, to bring in private attorneys to try the case?
It certainly is unusual, Vinny, but I tell you, I like the move from the prosecution's standpoint, because what they're doing to build off of what Candace just talked about, jury selection. Think about what they're going to be looking at and who they're going to want the perspective of. They're going to want the perspective of experienced criminal defense lawyers to sort of predict and get inside the head of Chauvin's lawyers. What type of jurors they want, what type of jurors they don't want. So in addition to the storytelling and the narrative, it all starts in jury selection. And to be able to have these prominent attorneys in the state of Minnesota with a criminal defense background, I think that may prove to be invaluable.
Vic, what do you think?
I think it stinks, Vinny. I just can't make heads or tails out of it. I can't, given my limited experience of almost 20 years as a defense litigator and general trial lawyer across the nation in significant cases, I don't understand the move other than to say that this may get rid of a serious appellate issue. In other words, the conflict of interest regarding the principal district attorney prosecuting the case early on is a very serious issue. As a lawyer, we know, Law School 101, you never put yourself in a position to where you are going to be the witness and the person presenting the argument about what you heard or saw. And that conflict of interest is a very serious conflict of interest. It's one that's gone back and forth with this judge in this case, and it may be a move to preserve the record. Other than that, it's nonsensical, and frankly, it slaps the face of the attorney generals working within that office. They're surely qualified enough to handle a case like this. While it has significant social consequences, it is a criminal case with criminal elements and facts and witness statements, nothing more. It's a confusing move, but it may be simply to preserve whatever type of conviction they can muster here.
Candace, what do you think? I opened this all up saying that this is almost like we're in bizarro world. Everything's opposite. There's like this role reversal. Why do you think it is? Or am I completely off base here?
Well, let me build off what was just said. This is a case that has serious social consequences, obviously. But there's social consequences unlike anything that we've seen before in the history of America, in terms of 40 countries on every single continent except Antarctica protesting, marching in the streets. So yes, this is social consequences, but on a scale that we've never seen. So when that happens, it's not going to be anything like we've ever seen before. Everything about this is unprecedented, which is why I think this case has turned so upside down. People want to get this right. and they're thinking out of the box, and they're doing things that are not normal in terms of what we think about what might happen in a criminal trial. They're doing the opposite to make sure that they get the result, because so much is at stake. I think that that's a lot of what is going on here.
David, has there been a lot of role reversal here, or am I misrepresenting what's going on here? Because I'm just going by, you know, I saw one thing, then I saw another thing. I was like, wait, usually the other side is doing this.
I absolutely agree, Vinny, with the exception of the first part, because, you know, as all of us on this panel probably have familiarity with, it's not uncommon to be representing a cop charged with abusing their privileges or abusing the law, whether on duty or off duty. That's probably the bizarro aspect of this entire case. But as you outlined in your opening, you know, going down the list of prosecution doesn't want the cameras, the prosecution doesn't want body-worn cameras before trial. The prosecution is the one arguing for lesser included offenses at such an early stage in the proceeding. The prosecution, you know, has to basically bring in their own experts to rebut the county medical examiner. All of that is, you know, really adds up to, as you indicated, this bizarro case, with the exception of the fact that the officers are the defendants, because, you know, as we've all seen, you know, that's not as uncommon as one may think.
All right. 4 days away, folks. And of course, Court TV, gavel to gavel coverage, day in and day out, night after night. When we come back, a shocking development in another story, trial that we've been covering here on Closing Arguments. There are no cameras inside the courtroom because that judge barred them, but incredible developments. A key prosecution witness murdered in the middle of the trial. That story next.
In day 12 of the Daunte Lucas trial, jurors heard from two of the lead investigators in this case, including a CBI agent and a Pueblo police detective. And much of the day was spent listening to an audio recording of an interview that Pueblo police officers conducted with Lucas after he was arrested at Denver International Airport in November of 2017. Now, Pueblo Police Sergeant Cody Wager was one of the two detectives from Pueblo who traveled to Denver to interview Lucas. The audio recording lasts several hours, and in it we heard the detectives telling Lucas to let it go and that it's time to tell the truth. Lucas kept responding to those statements by saying, "I can't tell you what you want to hear." The story Lucas gave them is that on the night KELSIE disappeared, she drove to Pueblo from Denver to visit him. They were both at his grandmother's house, where he said they drank alcohol, smoked weed, and used cocaine. He said his mom walked in on them at one point and was upset at seeing KELSIE, but then later in the night he passed out and didn't see KELSIE after that. The detectives poked holes in the story and questioned whether Daunte thought his mother could have killed KELSIE. During that part of the interrogation, he broke down and started to choke up, saying that he couldn't believe his mom could do something like that. The jurors also heard from CBI agent Kevin Torres. The CBI had a warrant to tap the phones of the Lucases. However, the agent Torres said that the Lucases found out about it because they would say things during their calls like say hi to the Pueblo police or not now, the phones are tapped. After that first jailhouse interview, Lucas reached out to the detectives. They arranged for a second interview at the Denver Police Department, and we are expecting to hear that recording when court resumes in the morning. Reporting from Pueblo, I'm Andy Cohen.
An intense trial taking place out there in Pueblo, Colorado. Daunte Lucas again accused of murdering his girlfriend, who just was confirming that she was pregnant carrying their child, okay? She disappeared. She's never been found. But there's a shocking moment in this trial. There was a witness who was supposed to testify that Daunte Lucas confessed to killing KELSIE Schelling. Confessed. That witness dead. Here is KOAA's Colette Bordelon with more on that.
We learn on Wednesday that a witness for the prosecution was shot and killed in Denver last week. The Pueblo DA confirmed to our Denver partners that this witness was set to take the stand later this week and apparently testify to a confession that Lucas made to her where he admits to killing Schelling. Now, Denver police do not believe the murder of 31-year-old Roxanne Martinez has anything to do with this trial, but it is still an open case. Now, we talked exclusively to her cousin, who says he just doesn't believe that.
Probably even in a way charge Dante Lucas, because I believe he's pulling some strings when he's inside the jail, because there are ways around that.
Neither the prosecution or defense could comment on the murder of Martinez. We'll be waiting for updates from Denver police.
Unbelievable development in a trial that, again, has all these twists and turns, and it's been a long time for KELSIE Schelling's family. Let's bring back in our think tank, Vic Bajaj. This is something you see in a movie or in an episode of Law & Order where in the middle of a trial, a key witness is murdered.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, in the last 20 years of handling serious cases and having a cup of coffee with my fellow colleagues who are on the other aisle, prosecutors, prosecuting a murder case without a body is a monumental task. Now, prosecuting a murder case without a body and without a witness just strikes at the heart, at the meat and potatoes of their case. So this is clearly a striking move backwards for the prosecution. Now, you can bet your bottom dollar that Miss Martinez and her history and her accomplices, her movements around have been completely discussed, and those will be discussed even more in the future. So we can look forward for more of that to happen. But to pin the tail on the donkey of the defendant is the wrong move in this case, despite the need for the public to do the same.
But, the state witness that was shot and killed, I don't see how there can't be a connection here in some way that they are not investigating, because it just seems completely unlikely that someone who had so much information that was vital to this case, that something like this would just happen randomly. Like her brother or cousin said in the package, people pull strings behind bars. And in this case, what was at the center of it was how influential Dante was, how influential, according to the text and the family, how influential, and just how kind of a mastermind he was behind just even getting her to drive out there before she was killed, allegedly. So when we look at this, I think that there's no way that we can't connect the dots, that this woman who died was not just someone who died without being connected with what was going on.
I think there's certainly something fishy here, right? Whether it's coming from the defendant, whether it's coming from the defendant's family, whatever the case may be, because the reality is that if the state of Colorado believes that he or the family or someone took the life of the woman who was carrying his child, supposedly, then everything else is sort of, nothing's really off limits. Right. But the issue, what I was thinking when I heard this was, first, it's terrible. It's another loss of life in this case. But secondarily, looking at it from, well, how is the prosecution going to move forward? How are they going to get in that statement that she apparently made to investigators that he confessed to her? So there's a whole other dynamic there, and how that's going to be received by a jury without the defendant's opportunity to cross-examine her because she's no longer here. Now, if he gave up that right by having something to do with it, that's a whole other issue. But that's a whole other wrinkle in this case now.
Is there any way that evidence gets in front of this jury? This confession, Vic, is there any way?
I don't think there's any way at all under the sun that this happens. Let's not pin the tail on the donkey here. Okay, he's the defendant, but that doesn't mean he's guilty of at least 2 murders. I mean, he's not a sympathetic individual, having been the last person to have potential contact with the deceased. But let's be realistic about it. He's the easiest target, but he's not the target that should be the only target investigated. So the implication here that he may have something to do with it, or surely he does, or he can call shots from behind bars, may be true, but it's misplaced. Let's not put the blinders on. Let's look for the proper suspects and conduct a proper investigation.
Well, there's a reason why this has gone to trial without a body, and that is because of the probable cause in here, that they have enough evidence in order to make their case. And maybe it's weakened by the fact that this witness is not going to be a part of the process, but this is why we're in court to begin with. Because even though there's not a body, we have circumstantial evidence to lead to perhaps a conviction. And you're right, he is not the most sympathetic character, and that's the problem. And that's what's going to be a part of his demise probably when this is all said and done. That's just how I see it, simply because of the fact that we're here in the first place with no body.
Well, that would assume that prosecutors aren't politicians. I mean, prosecutors are politicians, Candace and David. Sorry to cut you off there, but let's be realistic. Politicians are elected individuals. There's a tremendous amount of community uproar about this. Somebody's got to go to jail. I mean, how many cases have we seen in at least the past 3, 4, 10 years where judgment has been absolutely rushed, which has then left the prosecution with a withering case in front of a jury that may unfortunately cause more social unrest when acquittals come down? For instance, what we may see in the George Floyd case. But let's just be realistic about this case. Jumping to conclusions and saying, well, this is based on probable cause, respectfully, Candace, I think that may be, law school talking and our experience of what we want to see as lawyers. But let's not forget, these are elected officials that play to the tune of the public.
Then why was there so much lying? There's so much lying by Dante in terms of the baby and its viability.
And
that was
his story does not match with some of the video evidence in the case. We've got to leave it there for now. We're going to continue to track this case. Our affiliate KOAA doing great work out there in Pueblo, Colorado. All right, folks, the latest episode of the Court TV podcast is now available. We're covering the death of George Floyd murder trial. The video seen around the world has had a profound impact leading up to the trial, but despite its influence, it does not guarantee a guilty verdict.
Let me tell you about the pressure that is on prosecutors in the George Floyd murder trial. And it's not just because the world will be watching. It's because they have in their hands the most powerful piece of evidence I have ever come across in my entire career. It's a videotape of George Floyd dying, and it transformed our nation. That puts such incredible pressure on. We've all seen the video. We've all reacted to the video. But I know, and the prosecutors know, and the defense attorneys know, that once you get inside a courtroom, things change. Sometimes that incredible piece of evidence that you have doesn't translate into a verdict.
You can find the Court TV podcast wherever you listen, and it's always available on CourtTV.com. We'll be right back. On the docket tonight, a case out of Florida involving an FSU law professor. Dan Markel was his name. Great professor, brilliant legal mind, and was separated and had a tough breakup with his wife. And she was living in South Florida. He was living in Tallahassee. I mean, not close at all, but they had children. And there was a heated custody battle. And while all this is going on, he ends up being shot and murdered. Prosecutors say it was a murder for hire plot that was masterminded by his ex's family. But none of them have been charged. Just the people who carried out the murder and the woman in the middle. Ted Rollins has the story.
When Florida State law professor Dan Markel was murdered in 2014, he was in the middle of a nasty custody battle with his wife, Wendy Adelson, who is the daughter of a prominent and very wealthy South Florida family. Markel was shot in his driveway. His wife, who was an obvious potential suspect, had an alibi. Eventually, investigators arrested and tried this couple, Catherine McManawa and Sigfredo Garcia. Prosecutors believe Garcia killed Markel for the Adelson family and that McManawa set it all up.
She wasn't involved. She doesn't have the answers that people want her to have.
At trial, Catherine McManawa denied knowing anything about the murder.
Did you have anything to do with the murder of Dan Markel?
No, ma'am.
But prosecutors believe that McManawa is the connection between Garcia, the trigger man, and the Adelson family because she was previously in a relationship with Wendy Adelson's brother, Charlie, who had even once joked about hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markel.
Do you ever joke about he looked into hiring a hitman, but buying you a TV as a divorce present would be cheaper?
He did make that joke.
The jury found Garcia guilty of murder but couldn't come to a unanimous decision on Catherine McBanawa. If McBanawa wasn't involved, Charlie Adelson would have had to have hired Garcia on his own, which prosecutors say is unlikely because they didn't know each other.
I am 100% convinced that Charlie Adelson somehow contacted Sigfredo Garcia without letting Catherine know.
Part of that deal was Charles Adelson breaking up with Catherine so that Sigfredo could get back the woman that he loved so much.
None of the Adelsons, who prosecutors clearly believe were involved, have yet been charged in Dan Markel's murder. Catherine McBanawa, meanwhile, remains in jail, waiting her retrial.
You're probably as confused as I am. I mean, you're the prosecution team, and you say this is a murder for hire case, but you haven't charged the people who hired the murderers. Let's bring in the think tank. David Shapiro, tell me what's really going on here. How do you come to the conclusion that it's a murder for hire case, and you charge the murderers, the middleman who's a woman, but you don't charge the people who hatched the entire plot according to your theory?
I mean, if you want to talk about the bizarro case, Vinny, I mean, this one is up there too, as far as things just not going the way you or I or anyone here probably would think they would go. And I think what's really interesting about it is not only are they not charging, or not only have they not charged the family or the in-laws, right? But what they've done is they've gone after, obviously, the shooter, the getaway driver, and the middleman, or in this instance, the middle woman, when there's text messages and there's payments from the dental office to her with no explanation why the in-laws are paying her other than to facilitate this murder for hire. And they go ahead, they convict 2 and maybe 3 of these people who are doing the dirty work, but then they haven't done anything with the family. And it just doesn't make sense why they wouldn't try and bring in the defendants earlier on to flip on the people who are paying them, and they're going to wait until after they're convicted and serving a significant amount of their sentence. It just doesn't make sense.
Does this make sense to anyone tonight?
Yeah, something's missing here, right? When we connect the dots, we're looking at all of these connectors, and you can't have one without the other. You can't have somebody in a plot to commit, a murder for hire without the person asking to commit the murder for hire. So why aren't they in this equation? I don't know, but it certainly does look pretty good for Catherine in this regard, because it seems as though they're just trying to make her the scapegoat for some reason, unbeknownst to me. But she seems to just be the fall gal in all of this, because she's the only one of the 3 still that's kind of left standing, and they're going after her with fervor. But no one else in this chain of command potentially has been charged. I mean, we have the 2 co-defendants that have already gone to jail and admitted that she was involved. But it just seems very strange that this whole family has been left out of the equation, especially when there's a paper trail.
Well, let me just say something. Could this be preferential treatment? I mean, that's the elephant in the room, isn't it? Why is this family being treated differently? Their skin is light. They don't have a sordid past. They're not ethnic minority background. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, isn't it, Candace, David, and Vinny? I mean, that's what we're talking about. That can only be the explanation, unless there is really a weak link and they need this young lady who has recently petitioned for release. Given the new changes, the Supreme Court's going to look at pretrial release conditions and the inability to pay for the fees for release, and that not being a good reason to keep people in jail. And that's still going to be decided. So she's making her best effort to get out. She got rid of the extremely powerful and dangerous villain on the other side of a verdict the first time. Perhaps we'll see a deal. Perhaps the prosecutors will push.
Well, let me ask you about that. Let me ask you about a potential deal now. She testified at her first trial and denied all of this. I mean, I can't imagine that prosecutors can put her on the stand with a straight face, because she would have to get up on the stand and say, the last time I was on the stand, I committed perjury, but you got to believe me this time, now that I got out of jail based upon this deal I got. I can't see that happening.
That's why if they were going to do it, they should have done it before the trial. They should have done it before the trial, before she got up there and perjured herself, because now she has all the motivation in the world to give them whatever they need to get out of getting convicted.
She wouldn't do it, though. They kept trying to get her to flip, and she wouldn't do it. And she may not be doing it. Is it possible? Is it possible that she's the innocent one in all of this, despite getting paid for working at the dental office when her experience was being a shot girl?
It may be. It may actually be, but the pressure is going to mount. The pressure is going to mount, and it's very easy when you're in a certain lifestyle, and we've all represented individuals or prosecuted individuals on the other side who have had a history of what they believe to be loyalty to a certain group or certain people, or really fear. You know, this lady is going to be going to jail for quite a while if she's convicted, and she surely doesn't want to go to jail as a cooperating witness, I'm sure. This pressure is going to mount, and you may have a lot of evidence of accounting showing money going to her for no other reason, but you need somebody to corroborate it, and that pressure is going to mount, and I just wouldn't be surprised if you see a deal and cooperation. You know, I'll tell you one thing before I take up too much time here. I remember a cold case murder that I tried and I defended successfully on the principal charges, where my client's own brother testified against him. And the prosecutor said, despite my arguments pointing out the numerous and provable inconsistencies with the prosecution's evidence, said, you know what, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there are no angels in hell. And that jury believed it. And that may be the same thing that's going to say this poor lady has to be believed. She had life or death to pick the first time. We're going to protect her now, and she's part of Team America. I just think that's a real possibility.
Candace, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I do like what was laid out. We're talking about race, class, privilege, and we're also talking about the fact that she's a woman. But when we look at the last mistrial, they deliberated for 11 hours, and they were deliberating over something. So we're just not sure where this is going to go, because there were 10 people who believed that she was guilty.
You know, the other thing is one of the attorneys for the Adelsons, one of the best in the state of Florida, and that can be intimidating as well. All right, folks, we've got a case management hearing that's scheduled for May 6th on this retrial. We'll continue to track it for you right here on Court TV. When we come back, it's time to hear from you. A lot of security in Minneapolis, and I asked the question today, do you think that there will be any violence before, during, or after the George Floyd death murder trial? Your verdict when we return.
TV.
Emotions and passions were running high. That was outside the courthouse for a hearing in the George Floyd death murder trial. You saw two of the officers and their attorneys go into their car. Things very intense and a couple of the attorneys said that they were actually assaulted by someone in that crowd on their way out. Well, that was the scene. Things are much different now in Minneapolis as they get ready for the trial, which begins in just 4 days. I mean, they have set up barricades. National Guard on call. There's going to be a perimeter set up, and all of this in anticipation of what may happen, and nothing may happen. But I asked you as a 13th juror, do you think there will be any violence either during the trial or after the verdict? And here's what you had to say. We begin with our 13th juror comment of the day coming from Lori tonight, who says, before, during, and after, no matter the outcome, it will be destroyed, burned down, looted, and mayhem will ensue. I sure hope I am wrong, but from what I've seen already happen, it's inevitable, unfortunately. Candace Kelly, what do you think? I'm kind of leaning towards the way I don't think we're going to get that, but you never know, because what happens inside the courtroom is unpredictable, and the reaction to that is likewise unpredictable.
It is unpredictable. I think Lori's being exceptionally extreme to predict all of that. But here's the one thing that people don't know. They don't know that amongst all the peaceful protesters who say that they're going to be there, they don't know who else is coming. Let's think January 6th. Let's think about interlopers in many of the protests and the ones that actually did cause the violence. I'm not saying that it was just outside people, but there was a lot of mixing of people that people just didn't expect. And now we know that those who are planning to come down, and rest assured they are planning, we don't know about it because the chatter that they used to do online, they learned their lesson on January 6th, and they're doing a little quiet, much quieter. But I do think that we are going to see some, how can I say, some busy people on the streets. We just don't know where it's going to come from, and we don't know the extent of it. But I'll tell you this too, quickly. If there's a not guilty verdict, you're going to see a lot of action that you probably won't want to see.
Lisa Berry tonight. Violence will probably be during and after the trial. When people don't get their way nowadays, that's a given. Sure hope the violence potential doesn't bend those jurors' decisions. David Shapiro, do you think this will be on the minds of jurors? How people will react to whatever conclusion they come to?
I think, it shouldn't be, Vinny, but I think it's inevitable that it will be because, I laugh when I see during the questions, the questionnaire, it's like, well, how many times have you watched the video? Have you seen the video? Of course you've seen the video. Everyone's seen the video. So I think they understand, and any juror that'll be on this case starting next week will understand the ramifications of their decision, both inside and outside that courtroom, and arguably for generations to come. How much that affects their decision, I hope it really doesn't. I hope they apply the facts to the law and come to a just verdict, whatever that may be, whatever happens in that courtroom later this month.
Kathy, tonight, I hope not. Out of respect for George's family, any protests should be peaceful. Justice is the most important thing. Vic, what are your thoughts about, let's start with during the trial. Do you think anything is happening during the course of the trial?
No, I don't think so. I think if there's going to be, we already have, protests or peaceful protests being lodged with their appearances on the morning of trial out there just to have their voices heard. We know that. But when we're talking about violence, Vinny, in this context of this question, I don't think we'll see any of that until the verdict comes down. And only if on social media, let's say, or the media pushes a mantra of an unjust verdict. The value of violence is quite social. And I think the kaleidoscope and the panorama of our country now, post-election, importantly, is much different than it was pre-election. I would hope and pray for all of our God-fearing citizens of our fine country that there is no violence, but I think there may be. If there is an acquittal in this case, we should look to expect that.
Chris, tonight, I assume there will be peaceful protests that devolve into riots, destruction, and looting. I think it will involve some of the same players as last summer's and the Capitol uprisings. No doubt they're planning it now. But as we saw in Minneapolis, they are doing everything they can to try to stop that from happening. And I think cities around the country should also have this in mind, not just Minneapolis. Candace Kelly, David Shapiro, Vic Bajaj, great job tonight. Thank you so much for your insight, and I know we'll be speaking a lot during the course of the George Floyd death murder trial. Thank you so much. All right, folks, that's it for me tonight. I'm here every night, 8 to 11, your front row seat to justice. Have a great night, and don't forget to hug the kids.